Is that the voice of the Charlotte Hornets, Steve Martin, on the other end of this phone right now?
It's the retired voice.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
I'm good. You know this thing about women and remembering all that.
Yeah.
There's a reason. There's a reason why women use all that toilet paper.
Yeah.
They're in the bathroom writing stuff down. That's why they do that.
Do you remember, Steve? Oh my gosh, it is so good to talk to you. Do you remember? Because Kevin Harlan told me this yesterday, and it is still fresh. So I know I feel this way right now. But do you remember when you got to lay claim to being a full-time broadcaster for an NBA team in Charlotte, North Carolina? When you get to announce it, when it was official, do you remember that? Like it was a birth date or a child being born or an anniversary? Did you hang on to that date?
Actually, I didn't because it's kind of funny the way that it all worked out because the owner of the Hornets at the time, George Shinn, was in negotiations with WBT to be its flagship station, and basically the general manager of the flagship station, Tony Renaud, said, "Here's the deal. We're going to do the games. Here's how the deal's going to go down, and that guy over there across the table is going to do the games." End of discussion. So I'm trying to remember when that actually happened. That was about 4 or 5 months before the season began. That would be November 4th, 1988.
Yep.
And then I spent the next 3 or 4 months going out trying to convince radio stations in North and South Carolina and Virginia that it's something that's worth putting on their radio station.
And you would get in the car back then, right? Like you'd get in the car and you'd drive to affiliates and you'd sit down and meet with them and sell what you were doing at that point.
There was a company officer by the name of John Edgerton. And John and I would drive all over the 3 states. And we would go and we'd visit and we'd sit and talk with them. And you know, some people would see us. Some people would say, "Are you kidding?" And then others would listen. And that first season, we got about 35 stations on the air. And at its highest point, I think about 4 years into it, we had about 45 to 50 stations. We were one of the biggest in the NBA at the time.
Steve, you guys used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you guys used to be on like in Virginia too? You were outside of the borders of North Carolina, correct? With some of the
Oh yeah. We could go we really could go as long as we weren't within 150 miles of another NBA team.
Which was not hard at that point.
No, really, when you got down here. The only area you ran into trouble was in some places in Virginia. We could go to Roanoke. We could not go to Richmond, but we could go to the Tidewater area as long as we stayed on the south side of, you know, we stayed. We couldn't go to Norfolk per se, but we could go a little bit further south than that. And there were some stations. It depended where the transmitter was. And there were a lot of stations in the Tidewater area who have their transmitters technically inside the state of North Carolina. Still do, as a matter of fact. So we could go to those stations because they were 152 air miles from Washington. So we could go and get them on the air with us. And we did. We got a good amount of them.
I would bet, Steve Martin is with us, by the way. I can't believe we're talking to this man. This is so great. He's with us right now on the Technicom guest line. I would bet that you learned North Carolina in ways that you never even knew before, being in your car and driving around from radio station to radio station in every town in this great state. I bet you learned the state like the back of your hand doing that.
I sure did. And it was a great education with John Edgerton, and we would just go everywhere. We went every corner of the state, along the coast. We went, got to know, and that's how I really got to know how to get around the Raleigh and the Greensboro markets very well early on. And I think that's an essential thing that you have to do, and throw Asheville and Columbia into the mix as well. So I got a real good idea of, you know, what the South worked on. You listen to the radio stations as you went through, because you want to, you know, you're going in to talk to a station, so you might as well listen to them for about a half hour before you go in, and you know and that's part of the conversation. So yeah, it was a great education. John was a great teacher, and we were able to we were able to do a lot of deals back then and get on the air.
What do you remember back then, Steve, about when stations would push back other than what are you talking about? Like, what were their major reservations about carrying professional basketball from Charlotte, North Carolina on the radio? What would they say? That people didn't care about pro basketball, or what were their reservations?
Well, we're already a Tar Heel station, and you don't come close to that,
Yeah.
And just name the ACC school. We ran into that everywhere we went. We're an NC State station, and there were people who wouldn't get on with us, even when I showed them that there were very few conflicts. They would not get on with us because, hey, no, we've been Wolfpack from whatever, and I don't know what our audience would do if we put something else on, even if we kept the Wolfpack on with us. So why approach the question? You're out the door. And it did that for Duke, and you had to wander through a minefield. You had Wake Forest, you had Duke, you had Carolina, you had NC State, and then you go down to the southwest part of the state, and you're dealing with South Carolina, you're dealing with Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
You go into the Palmetto State, and you're hitting those head on. So, you ran into all kinds of objections because it would upset the apple cart of what Station X had been doing for 30 years.
Hey, Steve, while we're talking travel, I was kind of talking to Kroeger about the travel that he's about to face on the road in the NBA. What was your favorite road trip in the league, and maybe if you had a least favorite road trip or road destination?
Let's see. I was always partial to going out west to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it when Seattle was in the league. It was great. You could go. There was a time when we had Vancouver, we had Seattle, Portland, and you do those all on one swing.
Oh man,
which was terrific. San Francisco was great. Boston was great. New York, it's okay. The worst ones would be maybe Milwaukee. Cleveland used to be awful because they used to play way out in the suburbs. It would be halfway between Akron and the Cleveland airport. And it was out in the middle of nowhere. Del Curry tells a story where he and Brad Daugherty went out hunting after practice.
Oh, geez, you just step out the back door.
Back of the arena. Out the back of the arena. So, that's how remote that place was.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're talking to this man right now. The original voice of the Charlotte Hornets, Steve Martin, is with us right now on the Technicom guest line. You say that about New York because I've been thinking about that, Steve. You start to think about what life is going to be like. And my wife, we were at dinner Saturday night, and she said, "Have you thought about some of the great arenas you're going to get to go to? Where do you want to go?" And I said, I've been fortunate to see a lot as a fan. It'll be different as a broadcaster, but I've never been to MSG. And Kilgo said yesterday, Steve, he said, Madison Square Garden, it's overrated. And
he's right.
Is he really?
Yeah, he is. It's just think of it as an expanded high school gym. I mean, really. And they're always moving your seat around.
Okay.
And trust me, you're going to think it is the worst radio position in the league.
Okay.
And it is. Because there's one elevator to take up, and you and everybody who works at MSG are going to take this elevator. And it's not going to stop on the floor that you want to get off.
No.
And when you get ready to go to your broadcast position, A, do it early enough to get there in time, and B, make sure you've done everything you can on the floor because you're not coming out of there. And then C, there have been times where I've been, when I've been on the air doing the post-game stuff, then I'll get off the air, and the place is empty. And upstairs especially empty. And sometimes they lock the doors. So you got to go find your way back into the arena to get down to the ground floor to catch the bus to get to the airport. So, yeah, Boston or New York is very, very difficult. They make it, it's a hard city. It's a hard place to get a break, and it's a hard place to find the exit. So New York's shelf life with me is very short, maybe a day and a half.
Steve, what was your favorite thing, your tiniest little detail? What is your favorite thing that you got to say, I can't believe this was part of my job description, that I got to call this work? And beyond maybe even just calling the game itself, what was the tiniest thing that you said, man, I can't believe that this could be considered work. It's almost a perk that I get to do this every day with the job.
Well, everybody says, well, it's all about the last 2 minutes in the NBA. I mean, they said that when I first got into it. And, of course, that was the big knock about the NBA and why it was a failure as a television product and so on and so forth. But it's every every 2 minutes of the game. I mean, you can take a 2-minute slice of every game, and the action is just so concentrated, and you could be sitting there. And Kevin Harlan's a good example. You bring him up. I mean, sometimes he calls the first quarter like it's the fourth.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. There's so much dynamic happening, and probably, and I hate to say this, but it's in comparison to what you're used to watching in college basketball country, which is, college basketball is exciting, but sometimes college basketball can be, that the extra 11 seconds on the shot clock can be an eternity. That's 7 passes that don't mean anything. And there's just a lot of, and then in the college game, what's even worse, and the NBA game was headed there. I'm glad they've taken some measures to get out of it, but it would take you an hour to play the last 2.5 minutes of the game. And there's no reason for that to happen. And there's only so many substitutions and coaches 30-second timeouts that you can sit through.
Yeah, I've been amazed, Steve, to just sit courtside, and I know so many broadcast spots have moved, but just being at home with you and Matt on the broadcast and James on the broadcast the last few years, TV doesn't do this sport justice. I mean, these truly are the world's best athletes, and it's become such a graceful game that's allowed to be played in space. And I think some of those rules adjustments over the last few years in the NBA have been just some of the greatest things to watch these athletes be the best athletes in the world at what they do.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that television and radio are two distinct presentations of the sport. I mean, television, it always amazed me. You get paid more to talk less, and basically, you're an usher. That was, this is, we'll be right back, or you're queuing up, the analyst and making sure that he or she can get into the highlight that they're supposed to get into, and they take over the next. It's like football. It's 3 seconds of hell and 27 seconds of fill. But the thing about radio, and this is the only thing that I'll impart to you as far as any guidance or instruction, because I think you're going to be fine, and I'm very happy, by the way, that you're going to get to do this. This is outstanding. I didn't want to be a part of the process.
I know.
Picking who was ever going to take that seat. I didn't think I should be in that process. But the thing about it is, Chris, is that the great thing about radio is baskets aren't good until you say they are.
Yep.
But don't screw around, because you only have a short amount of time to enjoy that. Because at some point in time, the fans will catch up. The key is call the basket before the crowd reacts. That's what I always liked. That was the game I always played, and it's good. And then that wash that comes over the back, it's like catching a wave heading into the shore.
Well, Steve, I said this yesterday. I think the world of you. It's been a pleasure to get to share airwaves for you with you for about 3 years, and I hope retirement is treating you well. But I've never been one to have a seminal dream in my life, and I've just always kind of found things along the way that I was passionate about, and I pursued them. And I've tried to work really hard and make great relationships, and they've always led to other great situations. And I've been fortunate in that way. And I would have never dreamed when I took this job hosting on WFNZ 4 years ago, it would have led to this. But I know it was meant to be, and it's the ultimate honor of my lifetime to be able to try and usher in a new era of Hornets basketball, because I grew up on your voice, both on radio and on TV, and it is the absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you this afternoon. And I know you say you're not going to offer me any other advice, but I might push you on that. I might bother you the next few months, okay?
I only say that because I don't think you're going to need much advice, to tell you the truth. I think you're very well prepared for this. You're about to start a ride that you're going to enjoy doing for, I hope, a long, 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 long time.
Well, I tell you what, I'm already off on a bad foot, because you did this for 30 years and you never shed a tear on the air. And I was crying like a baby just trying to announce the whole thing was happening yesterday. So I'm already off on a bad foot. I got to catch up, okay?
Some of it is I didn't know what I was about to undertake, I guess.
Oh, man.
And then after I got over the shock of, I never thought I'd get out of the business. And after I got over the shock of telling somebody, I'm getting out. and especially someone who who was my boss.
Mm-hmm.
So going in, probably the toughest part was telling Mike Cristaldi I was done, and then after that I came to grips with it. And by the time we got to the final game, I was done.
Yeah.
And I knew it's time. It's over. It's done. No sense getting emotional about it. And and it's just you're ready to move on to a new era. The thing is, and I guess it helps that I've not done anything else in my life really, but do broadcast something for 50 years, and the last 30 of it doing the NBA. So yeah, I think I'm only 65, but I think I've had my fill, and it's time for somebody else to have the same kind of thrill that I had for this amount of time.
Well, I can't wait to take the baton from you, and when we tip it off for Game 1, whether it's on the home or the road, it's going to be a special night, and I'm gonna try to usher in a new era of Hornets basketball for a new generations of fan, because that's where you were for me, Steve, and so many others. And it is a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. And I'll talk to you here soon. Okay, I will not be a stranger.
Oh, we'll do it again, no doubt.
Okay.
Anytime. Give me a call.
You're the best.
I haven't got anything to do.